This is Steve Endo, and this is a quick demo of a prototype window that I put together over the last 2 days. And it is in response to a request to try and improve the payables transaction inquiry by document window in Dynamics GP. And if you're familiar with that window, it is relatively limited in what you can search for and how you search. You can only do one parameter at a time. And if you have a lot of transactions in history, this window can be very, very slow, issuing hundreds or thousands of SQL statements in order to get the data that it needs to display here. So it's a very inefficient and not very useful window. So I created this PM transaction search window to try and come up with something better. And so what we're going to do is it always starts with a date range. So it offers a date range of 1 year by default, but I'm just going to make a change here and bring it up to January 2017 so that I can collect more Fabricam data. I'm just going to press enter. After I press enter, it immediately retrieves the data, and I have a limit on my store procedure to limit the result set to just 200 records, because a person who is reviewing this data probably can't scan through 200 records at a time terribly effectively. So this window is designed to identify specific transactions and isolate them to allow the user to quickly go from 200 down to 2 records, for instance, which I'll demonstrate. And you see that in order to retrieve those 200 records, it took about 94 milliseconds to retrieve the data and about 246 milliseconds to display the data in the grid. Great, so now that we have our date range and we have our 200 records, let's do an example of what it would be like to filter. So I'm going to do ADV. So you notice that we instantly went to 8 records, and that took about 65 milliseconds roughly. So you can filter by vendor ID, vendor name, and document number, and those are like queries. So any of the fields that contain the value you enter, they will show up. So let's filter on vendor name. Let's go for the word wire. So you see instantly wire comes up. We have one vendor that's cleaning. You can see how quickly you can access this data. So Woodgrove Bank. And just a few characters as you type, it is dynamically updating this data set, retrieving new data, and displaying it, all in fractions of a second. So another request I received is, well, what if there's a particular dollar amount that you're looking for? Either you're looking for a specific payment or a vendor's asking about an invoice. Okay, so let's look at those invoices for $825. We've only have one. Okay, and so how about $45? Still only one. So you can see how quickly you can retrieve and view data here. So another thing you can do here is you can sort. So if you want to sort by document number, you can do that. Let's just filter it down. So I want to sort by document number. I see these are all in history. Or maybe you want to sort by date. Or maybe you want to sort by dollar amount. All of these columns can be sorted independently. And let's say that you want the vendor ID to show up earlier in the column. You just drag and drop. And maybe you're interested in the doc data as well. Let's put that up front. And maybe you know that it was sometime in early 2017. So you can just change the year here and it instantly filters. It was probably in March. So let's just filter from January 1st to March 31st. Instantly filters the result set again in milliseconds. So that's great. Well, what if I want to change the data that I have here more fundamentally? Well, all of this data is based off of a single store procedure. So in order to change the data, you do not need to modify this application. So you see here that I have a top 200. This is just a store procedure. And I'm specifying the doc type, and I'm querying the data dynamically using the store procedure. Let's say instead of INV, I want to see the word invoice, and I want to see the word credit memo. And then let's say instead of vendor ID, I just want to call this ID. But here, I want to say vendor name. Not a problem. We can rerun that alter statement, click refresh, and you'll notice that I now have ID, I have vendor name, and the word invoice is listed instead of INV. So that quickly you can completely change what data is displayed and how it's displayed. If you want to add additional columns, you can do so. The only columns that are required at this point are these 6 fields in order to facilitate searching. But if you don't want description, you can remove that, not a problem. If you don't need voided, you can pull that out as well. If you want to include a vendor phone number, you can do that. Easily add that column to the stored procedure. It'll instantly show up. So I think this is a much more powerful window for someone who's working with payables in GP all day and needs to get on the phone and quickly isolate issues, look up transactions, figure out what happened to a payment or an invoice.